Have you been hearing about all of these engine failures lately like I have? You know, GM and the L87 engine, almost 1 million vehicles recalled because of bad bearings. Yeah, they say there's only about 3% are actually going to see that catastrophic failure, but nonetheless, there's a significant big problem going on there. How about Honda and their little turbo 1.5s? There was an issue there. How about the Theta 2 engines, Hyundai and Kia? Oh, millions of vehicles recalled because of catastrophic engine failures, burning roadside, knocking, pinging, and a lot of people still have their engines on back order waiting to get their engines replaced. Many other problems. We're seeing Fords dropping valves in a 2.7 and a 3 liter. Many more problems. Just like Toyota and the 3.4 liter twin turbo V6 in the Tundra and the Lexus LX 600. There seems to be this ongoing issue with engine failures, and it seems like just about every single brand, even the brands that we really do trust and brands that we put faith in for years, Toyotas and Lexus, are now starting to have a few of these issues from time to time. What's going on in the industry? What's causing this? Well, I've been looking at a lot of these problems, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Ford, a GM, a Ram, whether we're talking about even a Honda, a Toyota, they all seem to be suffering something. There's something going on there. Something. Well, I've been thinking about this a little bit. Now, we see the advancement of performance, technology. A lot of people like to blame all the plastic under the hood, and that can be a problem for some of these engines. I mean, BMW had a lot of plastic under the hood, leading to a lot of premature failures in other ways. But it's not entirely plastics. Direct fuel injection. Well, that's contributing to some issues. Premature failing on PCVs, failure on other systems, carbon fouling, causing other issues, and sometimes in some cases, engines locking up. General Motors and their L87s piling up as well. What's going on? Transmissions, 10-speed autos, they're not holding up all that well. We're talking about even some of the automatic transmissions, some problems there. CVT transmissions, of course, where we're talking about Nissan and the Jatcos. It doesn't seem to matter where you look, you turn this way, you turn that way, there's going to be problems. These engines are an issue these days, and some of them are turbo and some of them aren't. Some of them have more plastics, some of them have less. So we always like to say, well, it's this issue, but it's really not that issue. It's not necessarily direct injection. It's not necessarily turbocharging, because think about all the big commercial diesel trucks that use turbo engines and they run for millions of miles. You know, a lot of it isn't necessarily the plastics and all the other components and technology. There's other factors at play here, in my own personal opinion. What I've been seeing, a lot of it is the ultimate pursuit of course, perfection and profits. Of course, a lot of manufacturers always trying to compete with each other to try to get the market share. A lot of it, the reduction of a lot of their maintenance plans, extending service intervals, means that that's a way to get a customer in the door. So a lot of these extended oil service intervals means it's a bit of a bragging right, and that gets people buying. Unfortunately, they tee that up. Next thing you know, people are skipping oil services or going 10,000 miles between oil changes, and then the engine fails in 3 or 4 years or starts to consume oil, and that's a problem, especially when vehicles like Toyotas are using low tension rings. Things like that start to kick in, or direct fuel injection, PCVs plug off, carbon fouling, that can start to take out rings and can start to ruin engines. But there's other facts. These manufacturers are all looking to try to compete with the regulators, the EPA and the CARB. They're trying to do things to meet these standards, these strict standards, efficiency, fuel economy. So now they're downsizing engines. And now instead of a V6, you might find a Turbo 4. You might find a lot of little engines now that once were bigger engines that were naturally aspirated. So now you're having smaller engines working harder. But there's other facts. Why are you getting metal particulate in the engine of some of these vehicles? How is that happening? Why is that happening? Well, in the pursuit, we know what was happening in 2020, and you couldn't get a vehicle out the door fast enough. People are sitting at home, they had extra money, there was government handouts, and people just felt like, I need to get out and buy a new car. I need to get out there and get something new, fresh, fun. And in doing that, unfortunately, it meant that a lot of manufacturers started getting more creative ways. Supply chain was struggling to keep up with the demand. Supply chain, getting the chips out, getting a lot of the modules, getting components, getting those parts and pieces to these manufacturers to build these cars was very limiting. They were struggling in doing that. And in doing that, of course, trying to fast track, trying to rush suppliers. Were they properly vetted? A lot of these parts were a problem. Now, allegedly, according to my sources, I'm hearing some of the issues that we're hearing with this new GM L87 engine came as a result of what? The crankshafts weren't necessarily machined to the right tolerances. They were built to a way, of course, to a rough tolerance. But, on an engine nowadays, a lot of these modern engines rev higher, they produce more power, more heat, and now the tolerances have to be much, much crisper. And the word I have is some of the tolerances were inconsistent, and because the supply chain received some of these crankshafts from Mexico, now there was a concern with some of the supply chain. And that seems to be a contributing factor to having extra particulate. Of course, some of these engines were built in the US, but you get supply chain providing parts coming from other countries or other suppliers. The quality control seems to be an issue. And then Honda, I already mentioned the 1.5. They're having issues there as well with the oil and fuel dilution. A lot of that, why were they using a 1.5 liter turbo 4-cylinder engine in the first place? Well, they were doing it to meet regulations. Where they used to use a 2.4 liter naturally aspirated 4, that was a reliable engine. But now they decided they have to start changing up the game. Regulators are coming in, squeezing harder for these. The mandates are coming down the chute to create vehicles that are more efficient. And of course, CARB standards means that you've got to use less fuel, because that's what it really is. Every year, these fleet levels of vehicles are mandated to create vehicles. A percentage of their vehicles have to consume less and less fuel every single year. And so brands like Honda coming up with technology, direct injection, combine that with a small engine like a 1.5, and turbocharging means you're adding extra boost pressure, extra fuel pressure, and now you've got oil and gas mixing because the fuel is getting past the rings, mixing around in the oil down below. That, of course, created problems and led to some premature engine failures. See, even the Hyundai and Kia issues and the facade and the episodes there that they've had a lot of problems. Some would argue it had to do with quality control, inspection, and even a whistleblower was finally said, look, there's issues here. And allegedly they spoke out, but they were told to basically hush orders to not say too much, even though it sounded as though, allegedly, Hyundai and Kia knew in advance what sort of issues there were, but they were sort of riding it out, is my word. I don't necessarily totally get the inside scoop, but that whistleblower had revealed that there was some inherent delay there. Now, whether it's a quality control issue, extra metal in the engine that wasn't cleaned out during the cleansing process, because all these engines are machined and you get all these filings and metal parts and pieces, little tidbits and filings, almost like wood chips. Think about if you're running a wood lathe and you're running a vehicle, or running a wood lathe and you're, say, milling a piece of wood and you get all these little flakes and chips of wood. It's the same thing with engines, but a lot of these filings might be steel, they might be aluminum, and a lot of these filings wind up in the bottom of the case and maybe weren't totally cleaned up properly. And Hyundai and Kia found out the hard way. Unfortunately, so did many millions of owners. Some found out right away, some found out later on, but nonetheless, people were finding out the hard way. Toyota, starting to have issues with that 3.5 liter or 3.4 liter V6. Everybody trusted Toyota for many, many years, and still they're a trustworthy brand, but sadly, this new 3.4 is creating havoc. Initially, it sounded like it was a 22 only, and then it was 23 model year Tundras were having issues. And now we're hearing in the forums that it's actually more. It's almost every single model year are still dealing with some of those issues. Now, again, it's a relatively small percentage of vehicles on the road that are catastrophically failing, and we have to put this all in a certain light and with a certain grain of salt, because not every engine is blowing up and not every engine's failing, but there's batches, there's series of those. Acura with their 3.5 liter V6, one of the tried and true most reliable vehicles. Acura and Honda, they were using that in the Pilot, in the Ridgeline, the MDX. They were using a lot of their vehicles, but they were having a series of vehicles with issues too. with retainers and a crank and a hub, and the tolerances were off kilter, and they were piling up engines too. So it feels like it doesn't matter. Some of the most trusted manufacturers, from Hondas to Toyotas to GMs to Fords, you name it, all seem to be going through these problems. Ford, 2.7, 3-liter. Have you heard about that? Some of their engines with their intake valves cracking the heads off, the heads coming off in the combustion chamber. I never thought but again, we're talking about supply chain. So they apparently rooted that back to issues and concerns in the supply chain, because those valves were supplied from a manufacturer that was providing those. And then they would heat up under boost pressure with a little bit of wear and tear. They'd fracture, and then the head would come off. And unfortunately, that resulted in a catastrophic engine failure. So again, whether it's a concern of or related to these mandates pushing manufacturers to stress their engines harder, we're seeing some of that. Not all these problems are the same. Hondas and the 1.5s making smaller engines, turbos, directed fuel injection, or whether it's supply chain challenges in the Fords, GMs, or whether it's Toyota. Maybe there's still a quality control issue. Maybe there's something in the factory, in R&D. Maybe it's even an engineering design problem. Whatever it is, there's a whole host of issues. But from what I can see, that's not the root cause. See, those are all indicators. Those are all flags and red flags. Those are all results of something bigger. And in my own personal opinion, I believe that the bigger is the push for profits and affordability and market share. So while all of these manufacturers still strive to take a bigger piece of the pie, they're trying to be more competitive. In my personal opinion, they're trying to cut corners where they can, whether it's through supply chain parts and products. Latest word is the newest Ford F-150 has far fewer parts than it did 2 or 3 years ago, because they're creating much more modularity in their components. So if something breaks, now instead of replacing that one part, it's part of a much bigger assembly, and now you're gonna have to replace that. It might have cost you $150 before. Now it might cost you $2,200. You see, that's what's happening now. Manufacturers are finding ways to create vehicles that are more efficient to assemble, cheaper to get parts from the manufacturers, quicker R&D, and ultimately looking for opportunities to save a dollar. Now, unfortunately, brands like Nissan are struggling. They're losing, and the inertia is not working in their favor. Have you heard the latest for Nissan? Their quality control and their CVT transmissions have really, really hurt their reputation. And sure, while they've created they've come back with a torque converter auto in some of their latest models. As a matter of fact, even their Frontier is a reasonably decent little pickup truck, 3.8 liter V6. I personally like those. But it's almost too little too late. The inertia is in the wrong direction because of such poor quality for such a long period of time, particularly where the CVT comes into question. Nissan now is looking at laying off many more thousands of people. The latest, this last 2 years, they've laid off almost 20,000 workers. The latest is by, I believe it's the spring of 2027 or 2028, things are going to get really ugly. As a matter of fact, they're looking at closing one of their key plants in Japan. One of those plants that actually was the foundation to some of their most amazing models that were legendary. So these brands are struggling for market share, struggling with competitiveness, struggling against the fights against some of the import markets from Asia that are creating more cost-effective vehicles that are more competitive. And it's just creating a stronger and stronger need to close those little gaps, to find even cheaper ways to manufacture something, to find a shortcut in engineering, to create a supply chain that saves a little bit more money. Labor costs continue to rise. Vehicle prices are rising, but is it enough to allow these vehicles and these vehicle manufacturers to continue this quality control? Or do we feel that the quality control is sliding? I mean, I haven't heard of so many engine and transmission failures like I have in the last 5 years. I literally haven't heard of these kind of problems. I mean, you'd have to go 10 years at a time to see big issues. and then, you know, they'd sort them out and move on. But there's so many problems. It's almost hard to keep track of the latest issues, whether it's a domestic product, you know, a Japanese product, or whether it's something from Europe. They're all struggling with some kind of quality control problems, you know, durability issues, longevity issues. And the problem is, with warranties running out at 3 years in most of these OEMs, it doesn't give the buyer a lot of confidence. Yes, you can still buy some amazing vehicles. If people ask me, hey, Mark, what are you buying if you're buying a truck? Right now, I'm getting a 22 Ram, because the way it looks right now, you can still get a Hemi. There's still a little bit of new old stock, and the word has it they might be bringing the V8s back. Right now, they only have a twin turbo straight six. If you need a middle-sized truck, I'm probably looking at a Ridgeline. I'm probably looking at a Nissan Frontier. If you want a smaller car, maybe something manual, I'm looking at a Mazda 3. If you want a smaller, mid-size compact, mid-size SUV, I'm looking at a Mazda CX-50 or a CX-5. And Toyota's got some great offerings too. They still have that good old trusty 2.5 liter 4-cylinder. And you'll find that teed up quite often with their hybrid drives. They have an ECVT, which is far better than Hondas and Nissans. And so you could still get some great reliable vehicles these days. But there is an underlying issue. And the issue that I see with a lot of these engines these days is the pursuit of cost savings, which we all like to do that, and business has to do that to stay in business. But the unfortunate part is it comes in the way sometimes of quality control, supply chain shortages or supply chain limitations, and certainly sometimes engineering. Engineering exercises, which sometimes means that they're creating more modularity, sometimes means that they may incorporate more plastics, sometimes may mean that they're working an engine harder, and sometimes it's just in the factory. Sometimes it's just a quality control issue. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting all that under wraps, looking after the quality control, having better processes to ensure that you don't have shortcomings. You don't have the metal in the engines. You have things that are cleaned out properly. You have things that are properly assembled. You have all the torque checks. You have the supervision. You have the manufacturing that is supported by process that's defined and verified as double, triple, quadruple checked, and that it's quality, that there's no shortcomings. Because ultimately, it seems it's a combination of, you know, pushes through mandates, quality control shortages, engineering, or even supply chain are all some major contributing factors. But I'll tell you this much, the way I see it right now, finding good quality used vehicles or good quality new vehicles that have good engines is becoming a little bit more spread out. Now, that said, it's not all doom and gloom. There's still some great, amazing vehicles with some awesome engines, and a lot of the engine problems we're hearing about are in relatively low numbers. Now, they might recall 1 million vehicles, or they might recall 500,000 vehicles, but in actuality, there may only be a 2% or a 5% failure rate. So it might not be that serious. And a lot of times it's just a batch of valves that got put into the supply chain. In some cases, it might have been a Thursday vehicle, and they pumped out, you know, 1,000 vehicles within that space, and they wound up not getting cleaned out properly. Sometimes that's all it is. But I'm glad we're getting the awareness. I'm glad we're seeing the understanding that there is a problem. There's something going on, and there seems to be some corner cutting in different places in different ways by the different manufacturers that are leading to some of these catastrophic and potentially catastrophic engine problems. Again, as always, don't forget to subscribe. Check out my latest video. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.